everybody, Ellie here for WhoCulture, and I want to talk to you in a bit more detail about the well, and specifically the Midnight entity and the Midnight connection to the well. Before I do that though, as last week I showed you, we have merch now, so if you want to get your hands on your own WhoCulture t-shirt, then you can find the store linked down below this video, just above the comments section. And we would love to see any pictures that you have if you do get yourself one of these, so do tag us if you do get your hands on one of our lovely t-shirts. But anyway, for those of you who might not be aware, who need a little bit of a refresher, the episode Midnight from Series 4 saw the Doctor on the planet Midnight before it got stripped of all the diamonds, when it was still a planet made of diamonds. He went on this tour and he was with a group of other people on this little shuttle bus thing. And along the way, a creature that they couldn't see started to play games with them. But as time went on, its games got better, it started to learn, and it started to put doubt into all the people on this shuttle, and it put them all against each other. It really played on people's paranoia, and it was a really scary episode. But the most terrifying part of it was that we never actually got to see what the creature looked like. It was this unseen entity. It was banging on the outside of the shuttle, but nobody knew what it looked like. The characters didn't, but we as the audience also never got to see what it looked like. And so it was entirely up to your own imagination. And I think that was the scariest part of that episode. Whoopsie. But then obviously in this episode we did get some very brief glimpses of the entity. And if you watch the behind the scenes content for this episode, you do get to see in much finer detail what this creature looked like for filming purposes at least. It was mostly just a mask. It was only ever seen very briefly from kind of head level anyway, so there was never any kind of body designed for it. The mask itself was quite creepy, but it was kind of this... It's hard to explain. It kind of just covered the entire face. It almost reminded me of the face huggers in a way. It's very dark. It's kind of maybe got eyes, maybe not, maybe got a mouth, maybe not. It's a very typical alien, sci-fi alien looking creature. Not like your typical green man with big eyes and weird shaped head, but like horror film kind of alien. And obviously the big thing here is, should we have seen what this creature looked like? As I say, in Midnight, the most important thing for the episode, the most gripping element of the episode, is that we didn't ever see what the creature looked like. And that was what played on the paranoia of the episode. So then I guess the question comes here is whether we should have had any sort of physical body for the creature. Now I did touch upon this in the ups and downs because I feel for the most part, as intended to be watched in the episode, we never saw it for any extended period of time. So we never saw it for long enough to really grasp what it looked like. Obviously now that we've had the behind the scenes footage, it kind of now almost spoils that illusion a little bit, and now everyone has a kind of idea of what it might actually look like. I don't know whether it was necessary to have something there for filming purposes, for eye lines, for the actors' purposes. You can see why it was necessary for there to be something physical there. But I also feel like, would it have been better if we'd just seen a shadow? Which again, would that have been so easy to do on film? But I mean, they've then done all sorts of really high-tech fancy things, like putting a shadow in shouldn't be that difficult. But I think because the whole draw of the creature is that you shouldn't know what it looks like, now that we've had these really clear, focused sections about it in the behind the scenes content, it kind of ruins that illusion because you do know what it looks like. This is where it gets a little bit interesting because I kind of have come of a mindset that Danny thinks is silly. But I kind of can get on board with the idea that this is not canonically what the creature looks like, but for the purposes of filming, this is what they use to get that effect to make it work. But in terms of what the creature looks like in universe, it's still left unknown and up to the imagination. And I can kind of get on board with this because in the episode itself, we never see it for a long period of time. If they wanted us to know what it looked like, we would have had lingering shots on it. But in my mind, we still don't know what it looks like, really. We just know what the filming model looked like for the purposes of getting the shots we needed and for the actors to have something to react to. But I also don't think that necessarily needed to be there. They could have shown the actors what it was, an idea of what it looked like, without us as the audience having to have a whole section behind the scenes about what it looked like. I think that kind of takes you away from the spooky part, is drawing the conclusions yourself. But then what I think is also very interesting is this episode was not always intended to be a sequel to Midnight. And so if it wasn't always intended to be a sequel to Midnight, then the entity wasn't always intended to be this mysterious creature and then could very well have had an appearance. This is what Russell said on the Unleashed episode. The elements kind of said to me, it's a mining planet and it's deserted and it's deadly and it's poisonous and there's something hidden and people have disappeared. All those scary things are in place, so that all just kind of demanded, don't try to pretend this is something else, this is the same planet. So as I say, how much of this creature was already created looks-wise, powers-wise, design-wise, everything about it, how much of this was already created before the Midnight connection was brought into the story? How much of this was part of Sharma Wolfell's original idea for the episode before Russell T Davies came in and then retroactively changed it to a sequel to Midnight? If we look at it like that, then we kind of assume, well, this isn't the same entity as the Midnight entity. I know they've said, oh, this is now the Midnight entity. But in terms of the look of it and everything, they didn't go in going, this is what we want the Midnight entity to look like. This is what we want our creature to look like, and now we're going to make it the Midnight entity. But obviously, if you have that connection to Midnight in your episode, then people are, of course, going to assume that this is now what the Midnight entity has always looked like. And it somehow makes it less scary because, as I keep saying, the element that was the most scary about this creature is that you didn't know what it looked like. You couldn't see it. And I brought this up in the ups and downs as well. Obviously, this then does raise the question of whether this episode should have been a sequel to Midnight. If you're going to show us what the Midnight entity looks like, should it then have been a sequel to that? Should have taken a bit more care if you knew that this was going to be a sequel to such a well-loved episode, knowing the reasons why it's so well loved. But as I also say, in the episode itself, you never actually see the creature for that long. I think the thing that's really harmed it here is the amount of attention that's been drawn to it in the behind the scenes footage, which I understand some people might not have seen. I do feel like if you wanted this episode to be a sequel to Midnight, perhaps it would have been better to have gone in with that intention from the beginning and then built up from there, as opposed to having a story that had some vague similarities to Midnight and then slapping the sequel title on it and then not really considering what that means retroactively for that episode. As I said in the ups and downs, though, I don't think it completely ruins the episode. I think, as I say, the behind the scenes is what's kind of harmed the creature's scariness, I feel, by drawing so much attention to what it looked like behind the scenes. What is quite interesting, though, is Russell literally says in the Unleashed clip that Midnight is the kind of episode you should not do a sequel to. So why did you? But regardless as to whether you did or didn't like the physical entity itself, or whether you think that this should or shouldn't have been a sequel to Midnight, I think what we can all agree on is that we shouldn't learn too much about this entity. Now, in the behind the scenes YouTube video for this episode, Russell T Davies said that originally they were trying to base this episode around the Nigerian Orisha gods, but they couldn't quite make it work, and so then they decided to substitute those gods for the Midnight entity. So then we have the question of, if they were trying to tell a story surrounding specific gods, does that godly intent remain with regards to this Midnight entity? And does that mean that the entity is now going to be kind of retconned to be part of the pantheon of gods? Obviously, there's such a theme of gods in this series, and knowing that the intention originally was to focus on gods and fold them into the pantheon and make them villains, how much of the story then changed when it became the Midnight entity? Or do we now kind of expect this Midnight entity to become a member of the pantheon? Now, if you recall, Alice said that when the creature came up from the mines, from the well, people said it was laughing. Obviously, we all now have this kind of mental scariness of the giggle. It was in last week's episode, Lux. We now have this kind of connection between this very specific laugh and the pantheon of gods, or the toy maker at least. The Doctor also says that the entity plays games, which is also a way that the gods were described in Lux. They like to play games, that's the whole point. The toy maker, all of them, they play games and they follow the rules. So it can't be ignored that there is this slight alarm bell ringing here, suggesting that this creature is now a member of the pantheon of gods. To be perfectly honest with you, I don't want that to be the case. It's one thing to have created a sequel to Midnight. It's another thing to retroactively change the creature from that episode to now fit with the storyline of your new series. I don't know. I said in the ups and downs that it could have been worse, and what they did do was okay. They didn't ruin Midnight, and they could have, so leave it at that. And I stick by that. Please don't ruin Midnight by making this creature some part of the pantheon. Leave it as it was. The beauty of this episode, the beauty of this monster, was that it was so ambiguous and you knew so little about it. If it now becomes part of this new story arc that's very well known, I don't think I would like that. Obviously, at the end of the episode, we're left with this big ambiguous ending, this big cliffhanger, which could suggest another sequel to the sequel, and that this creature is going to return again, because did it leave the planet? Is it now out there in the world? I don't want them to go any further with it. You are safe, you're okay at this point, but if you go any further with it, you very much risk ruining what was a really, really, really great Doctor Who story. Leave it alone. Now, obviously, one of the big questions before this episode aired, surrounding the speculation that it was going to be a sequel to Midnight was, is it going to ruin Midnight? And as I've said many times in this discussion, it could have been worse. I don't think it did ruin Midnight. I think the one thing that maybe has ruined it slightly for me, ruined the mystery for me, is so much attention behind the scenes to what the creature looks like. Whether we want to go down the avenue of believing that this is not what the creature looks like canonically and it's just a point of reference for filming purposes, I think I would like to verge more down that route so that I can still have in my mind this idea that the creature is formless and we have no comprehension of what it looks like. Now I do feel that it's slightly difficult not to picture this masked stunt performer when I think about the creature. But I also feel like The Well can be its own standalone story without any connection to Midnight. And I kind of prefer to look at it like that. I didn't really feel the similarities massively between this creature and the Midnight entity anyway, so I kind of feel like it wasn't necessary for it to be a sequel to Midnight in the first place, and so it's quite easy for me to separate it from Midnight. And I feel like that's the way I want to go with it, because I think it was a really great episode in its own right, without needing the Midnight connection. And Midnight is such a brilliant episode and so mysterious, and not knowing what the creature looks like is such a big part of that, that I kind of don't want to taint it by linking it and connecting it so much to this new episode where the behind the scenes have kind of spoiled the mystery. But for more details and conversation specifically about this, make sure that you watch tomorrow's discussion video. So usually we'd have a discussion video today, but because we have this video today, the discussion will be coming tomorrow. But we did have some very interesting conversations surrounding the episode being a Midnight sequel, surrounding the creature, what it looks like, what we in our minds think it looks like. And it was a really interesting conversation to have, so make sure that you stick around to watch that tomorrow. In the meantime, I've been Ellie for WhoCulture, and in the words of Riversong herself, goodbye, sweeties.